Mario, Ma, your kosher clinician. Often in the Black community, therapy is seen as a stigma. A stigma that's impacting many men and women on many different levels. But because this show more or less highlights or more or less talks about the dynamics as it relates to Black men in America, we're going to be exploring why therapy is needed not only from the clinical framework, but also from the biblical context. If you know anything about human beings are what I call biopsychosocial and spiritual. Human beings are integrated beings. And when one element of that integration is off, it can cause a lot of pain to the psyche or the schema of an individual. As a clinical therapist, we're going to be exploring all the different talking points as it relates to therapy and why therapy is beneficial and really needed to help Black men and Black women in any ethnicity move forward. Dr. Thunders will be coming from a biblical framework, and he also will be coming from an academic framework. And we're going to look at all the nuances as a clinical therapist out of Tar Heel State, will more or less be determining what needs to be addressed and why men such as Kevin Samuels has actually talked about the importance of therapy in the Black community. And from this show, I want you to ask yourself the question: is therapy a needed commodity, or is therapy something that most should stay away from because it doesn't benefit them? You're going to love this show, and we're going to have a lot of insight and clarity as Dr. Thunder and I talk about the importance of therapy from the clinical framework and also from the biblical framework as well. Be welcome. Mario, Ma, your kosher clinician.
This is Thunder's Thoughts, and I am Dr. Thunder. And today we have a special show, and our topic is, why is there a stigma about therapy in the Black community? And to help us unpack this is a therapist, the kosher clinician. So we're going to chop it up on this topic. So stay tuned and let's go. Hello, kosher clinician. How you doing?
I'm doing swell, brother. I'm doing swell on this lovely, lovely Wednesday in the Tar Heel State. As I always like to call it, the greatest state in the union. But I'm doing great, man. It's a pleasure to be on your platform today.
Yeah, it's good to have you.
No
This
doubt.
topic, this topic. Why is there a stigma about therapy in the Black community? I think, this is an important topic. One reason I think it's important, and maybe has even come to prominence in a way, especially in the Black manosphere, um, in the red pill spaces, and in the Black community, I think, is because of one Kevin Samuels,
Hmm.
uh, who is rather insistent about people getting therapy. And this is not something, of course, you know, most of his most of the shows that people are aware of are shows where he's talking to women. But prior to that, he was focused on sort of providing kind of leveling up kind of content
Hmm.
for men, and he
Right.
was very brutally honest. And he also frequently was telling the men. Okay, sorry. Oh, all right. See you later. All right, that wasn't supposed to happen, but that's all right.
No, you're fine.
That's my son. He's got a baseball game.
No doubt.
Ordinarily, I would be at his game, but this is a makeup game and got scheduled on top of the show. And so, anyhow, I'm sure my wife will send me lots of pictures, and I'm sure I'll be video chatting with her at some point
Yes,
during
sir.
the game. So, uh, but but Kevin was rather uh, insistent that the men get counseling also. And in a recent broadcast, I heard him say that one of the reasons why he is telling people to get therapy is because uh, he himself got therapy and he has done the work.
Yes, sir.
And so he's not just talking the talk, but he's actually walking the walk.
Right.
One thing I've heard him say is that uh, basically black folks, we're walking around with all kind of untreated trauma.
Yes.
And look, I'm not here to complain about the 400 years of repression and all of that. That's not what I'm here to talk about. But the fact is that especially for men, I would argue there's a tremendous amount of stress,
Hmm.
and unless we start to uh, you know pursue therapy seriously, like actively start actually um, walking in that direction, actually picking the phone up and setting up appointments. Until we start doing that, I think I don't know. I think we're going to be in rough shape. So, what do you think?
Well, listen. There's a stigma associated with therapy. A lot of it's due to the lack of socialization as it relates to therapy. Therapy was not one of those nuances that Black people or those in the Black community had in the past because it was often afforded to others outside of the Black communities. And so a lot of times the therapy that a lot of Black people use a lot of times was ancient spiritual worship, but also the therapy for many Black people were the gospel. That was their therapy because that's the only thing that they knew. Um, Traditional therapy was seen as a luxury that was afforded mostly by white people. And so, a lot of Black people didn't realize that therapy was an option that they could actually use to help them reduce some of the issues of their traumatic past. But also, Dr. Thunder, there's a stigma behind therapy because people assume or more or less assert that, like the old people say, that therapy makes you crazy, means you're crazy as hell. And it doesn't mean that you're crazy as hell. I always tell people that broken people need help. Doctors need doctors, pastors need prayer, and therapists need therapy. And so, if those major elements that can more or less be combined as it relates to them needing help, how much more does an individual need therapy as well? The gospel says that in the multitude of counselors, there is safety. And so therapy is one of those modalities or one of those treatment protocols that can help cure and heal people along with spirituality and faith.
Now, what do you think of this comment that just came in?
Yes, I totally agree. Men a lot of times, how dare you? You're correct, sir. Men have always suffered in silence because we have been told that we had to be warriors. So we've been told to suck it up. And part of that could be how men have been socialized just to deal. We deal with it by not dealing with it, or we deal with it by internalizing it. But that's dangerous. When Jesus was in a place of solitude, he went and wept. But he didn't stay there. You can't stay in your pain. You have to eventually get up. But I think it's the way men have been socialized that's one of the reasons why they get pigeonholed and to not getting the help that they need. And then sometimes it was seen as shameful. You got to understand that the baby booms in the generation before then, a lot of those men had traumas, but the way they did it, they dealt with it by self-medication, by drinking, by domestic violence, and some of them did it by having sex with multiple women. So that was that self-medication. That's how they dealt with it. I always tell people when they think about Mr. I'm going to do a show at some point called Leave Mr. Alone. Mr. had a lot of unresolved trauma as well. We don't look at the negative attributes of Mr., but we don't look at the antecedents that cause Mr. to become who he is as a person. And so I'm going to do a show at some point called Leave Mr. Alone, because the Mr. was more or less a byproduct of trauma.
Yeah. So now you said something about that's all right. I'll loop back on that.
That's fine.
And salute to you too, Blind Guy, his wife, their life, which have been very much supportive of the channel.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. They are channel members. I did a show on their channel. I did an interview on their channel. I think it was about a couple weeks ago, and I had a good time over there. And we're going to do something. I'm going to bring them on my show sometime pretty soon. But really kind of overcoming kind of story that they have, and they do all of this stuff as a family. It's really good stuff. All right, so this whole that's what I was going to say. You said something there about we're supposed to grieve, we're supposed to express our pain, but we're not supposed to stay there.
Right.
And something that I've heard Kevin say frequently is, he'll ask somebody if they're in therapy, and if they say that they're in therapy, then he'll say, "How long have you been in therapy?" And then if they say something like 2 years or 3 years or something like that, then his next comment is, "Well, therapy is not supposed to be. You're not supposed to just be in therapy forever." So what is your thought process on therapy? How long someone should be in therapy? I'm sure it's not a one size fits all kind of thing.
Right.
But
Right.
I mean, I'm sure you probably talk to other therapists also and discuss like whoever it is that you're serving and how long they've been with you, and is it time to have them to try to wean them off of this or whatever. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, listen, he makes he's right to the point that he's wrong. It depends on the treatment modality that you're using. Psychoanalytic therapy could be longer, because that's more of the Freudian type therapy. But normally treatment models like CBT or brief solution therapy or focus, brief solution focused therapy, ideally they can be up to a year, maybe 2 years at the max. But some of the deep-rooted issues related to trauma, a lot of times they could go a little longer than normal. But it's also based on Dr. Thunder, the person's willingness to do the work. So he's right to the point that he's somewhat wrong. But see, the problem is a lot of people don't do the work. A person can be in therapy for 3 or 4 years. Some of it could be because they're not doing the work to get to the level they need to get to. So therapy is called a therapeutic alliance where we're working together as a team. My job is to be the facilitator, but the client has to be engaged. When I was in graduate school at Carolina, one of my professors said that if I'm doing most of the work, then it's not therapy. So therapy is about you being willing to introspect, to use the treatment protocols that I'm giving you, to do the work in a therapeutic alliance, do engagement, and the people that are engaged, man, they get the proper outcomes. Like I tell people, my job is to guide you through the nuances or to help you to uncover so that you can recover. My job is to give you the tools to be successful, similar to what Christ said himself. He said, I give you power. And so Christ was the master therapist because he gave his disciples power to overcome that thinking error. I call it a schema that they are actually having as it related to being disciples of the gospel. Christ was the master teacher, but he also was a therapist as well.
Huh. That's very interesting. So
Right.
let me ask you, and you can go wherever you want to go with this, and this is a pretty general question. Why is therapy important? And in particular, why is it important for Black people?
Therapy is important because we live in a very dysfunctional culture. It's very important because the things, Dr. Thunder, that we deem to be normal are actually abnormal. We tend to more or less normalize behaviors that are actually should be pathologized.
Mm.
We tend to pray our pain away instead of using prayer plus therapy to deal with the issues that we're having. Now, I want you to hear this. There's a such thing called the biopsychosocial spiritual model, right? All four of those things mean you must start with the biology first. Then once you start with the biology, you start with the mind. Then you start with the social. And then you do get to the last. It's called the spirit. As I said, men are integrated beings. We're soul, body, and spirit. And so if one part is impacted in a negative way, it can cause what's called a psychosomatic response. So we're integrated beings. Anything that's off kilter can disrupt everything. And so therapy is very important because we have physical abnormalities going on in our body that we have not addressed, which is causing us to have psychic issues or psychological issues as well. So it's important, man, because it helps us to be healthy and whole. It's important because it helps us to see the errors of our way, the thinking errors that we have. And thinking errors in the clinical term it could be magnification, the minimization of problems. It could be fortune telling. It can be cognitive distortions. It can be cognitive dissonance, a fancy way of saying that, you can't hear even though the evidence is there. So it's important because it helps us to become healed. And if you go back to the ancient tribes in Africa, some of the therapists back then were actually shamans or the African doctors. They were types of therapists as well. So it's important, man, because it's to the healing of the soul, mind, body, and also of the spirit.
Yeah. So let's even be more specific. What if, say, what if you have had bad experiences in relationships, but you never really stopped to take stock, and you just keep kind of jumping into relationship after relationship? Now, in particular, can you talk about this maybe from a female perspective?
Right.
What if it's a woman that is sort of not really hasn't really done the work, hasn't really even paused to sort of to calculate, the sort of the damage that's been done, and is sort of just hopping to the next thing over and over? Why would it be important for that person?
Right. Well, so it would be important for that person, Dr. Dunner, because it's like they are self-medicating by jumping from relationship
Oh,
to
right.
relationship, but they're not actually dealing with the trauma from the past relationships in order to get better, to go into something new. Remember, I said you have to uncover first in order to recover. But their uncovering is more or less a negative way to recover instead of letting that wound heal 100%. And then they jump back into another relationship. See, you and I talked about in private, promiscuity and rampant promiscuity has been a detriment to a lot of our women. And what women don't understand, they are vessels. And so when you allow different energies to come inside your vessel, that can be detrimental not only to your body, but also to your mind. And so when you keep having those different energies in and out of your body, it can cause you to be in a state of disarray and also a state of disrepair. So it's important to introspect, to look at what you did wrong in the relationship so that you can uncover in order to recover and learn from those pathologies that you had in the past in order to make yourself become a better person for the next person in the future. It's almost what I call a psychic detox. And the problem with a lot of our women, they're not doing a psychic detox, and they're not doing the shadow work in order to move forward in the future.
All right. All right. Well, kosher clinician, why don't you give us some of your background, maybe how you grew up, and then what sort of led you to become a therapist, and maybe aspects of your training, maybe some mentors and that kind of thing.
Well, listen, I grew up in rural eastern North Carolina. I'm from the Tar Heel State, once again, the greatest state in the Union. I think it's the greatest state in the Union where the topography is serene, pristine, and verdant green. But so my background is very diverse. I have multiple degrees. I got my first degree in criminal justice. I went to school to be for law enforcement. I worked as a mental health correction officer. But let's backtrack a little bit. I always knew that I was going to be a therapist when I was 11. I was always the Miller child. And Miller children tend to be, how can I say it? Miller children tend to be the advocates for a lot of the issues going on in the family. So I knew around 9-11 I was going to be a therapist, but I didn't know that God was going to take me on this path. So I went from being a mental health, being a mental health correction officer back in, getting a associate degree in that. I worked 7 years in law enforcement. And then from there, I worked, 2 years in law enforcement and mental health correction. And then from 7 years, I did 7 years with the Department of Juvenile Justice. From there, I went back and got my bachelor's from North Carolina Central. Went back to North Carolina Central, got my license in special education. I taught school for 5 years because I am a teacher. Teachers running my family. But I realized in the bureaucracy of teaching that I couldn't be my authentic self. So from there, I went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and I got my master's in clinical social work. And I'm a therapist now because I knew back in 2009 there needed to be a voice for Black men. No one was advocating for Black men. No one was advocating for Black boys. No one was advocating for Latin boys and Latin men, but no one is really advocating for men in general, white, Asian, or whatever. Men are told, let's deal with it. We're seeing this, what I call, a term I created, Dr. Thunder, called the commodification of subjugation as it relates to solipsism. Dr. Johnson created a term called the CompuServe, but I parroted that term and came up with my own term called the commodification of subjugation as it relates to solipsism instead of the commodification of glorification as it relates to building. The commodification of subjugation sees a man as a utility. The commodification of glorification sees the man as a tool and an asset that can benefit the man and the woman. And so that's it in a nutshell. I grew up in a traditional 2-parent home. My dad was a blue collar worker. He worked in a paper mill. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. But I believe it was divine protocol that I became the person that I am. I tell people when I was 9 years old, I asked God for wisdom, and He gave it to me. And it's been a tumultuous journey because I've been sidetracked multiple times because the world is not used to masculine, dominant Black men. I'm 6'5", 6'6" with shoes on, almost 280 pounds. I need to lose some weight. I need to drop about 40. But I'm a big man. I'm a big man just like you. And the world is not used to masculine, educated Black men. And so, like I said, I always knew, I'm backtracking a little bit, I always knew that I was going to be a therapist. I didn't realize I was going to go in the route that I was going to go on. But I've always knew at some point I wanted to advocate for people, especially Black boys and Black men. Yeah. If that answers your question. I hope I answered your question.
Does. It does, and my journey is, I'll kind of share a little bit about my sort of political journey and how that has sort of led to the my a lot of my thoughts about black men, black boys, men's rights advocacy, and the like. But growing up, my hero was uh, Malcolm X.
Hmm.
He had that swag. Um, he was speaking the truth, and he was kind of a rebel, and there's something about that kind of spoke to me. And I remember, I had the book, and then of course later when I saw the movie, the scene where I'm talking about Spike Lee's movie,
Hmm.
Malcolm X, the scene where he uh, uh, one of their guys gets beat up by the police, and he goes to the hospital. They a bunch of brothers on the street in lockstep and responding to like hand motions that Malcolm was making, and that just,
Hmm.
I don't know, it just did something to me. I was like, oh snap, that's what I'm talking about. Um,
Hmm.
so there was that, and then I kind of became more kind of liberal, a little bit more liberal. My my parents are more liberal. My dad has been a lifelong Democrat, and as a kid, that you tend to idolize your father, and um, it seems like the process in Ike Ogiamian says this frequently. You idolize the father, you demonize the father, then you humanize your father. And so through part of this idolizing, I think I took on some of his political views, and then I started asking a lot of questions, and I became a lot more conservative, conservative to the point where I pretty much was identifying with most of the sort of Republican kind of platform.
Right.
And because I'm a Christian, the whole pro-life thing is big for me. 50% of black babies are aborted. fifty
Right.
percent,
Right.
50%. I did a show. I did a
Right.
Thunder's thoughts on the abortion issue.
Hmm.
50%. It's incredible. And so
It's
a lot of
incredible.
those
I
kind,
agree.
yeah, and so a lot of those kinds of issues became, uh, I saw some common some common stuff with the Republican Party, and then that was kind of a short period, and then I became more kind of libertarian, maybe paleo conservative, more you know right leaning, but um, less, but sort of sensitive towards uh, social programs, because I see that black folks often are helped by social programs, and so I have a sort of soft spot for social programs. And I don't know, probably over the last 15 years, I've been a third party voter. So I've not voted for Republicans or Democrats. And I have increasingly seen that both Democrats and Republicans have been jointly culpable for where we are, for where black people are. They certainly
Hmm.
haven't done anything to help us, not for real. The Republicans don't even show up. They don't even try. They don't even come to the communities. And the Democrats, at least they're there, but they're not doing anything to help us. They just
Hmm.
depend on our vote. Um, and in recently, probably the last couple of years, I have totally transitioned to being more black nationalist, which is
Mm.
interesting because that's where I began with Malcolm.
Right. Right.
Um,
Right.
it's interesting how that sort of happens, and I think part of that transition also is because of my son, and I'm recognizing that unless a lot of the issues that we face are uh, are discussed and are solved or resolved or at least improved, my son will have to deal with the same stuff that I've had to deal with, that everyone else has had to deal with. And so I am committed to trying to do what I can do, not just for my son, but for uh, for our young people. If we're not willing to make these changes, to do something about a lot of these problems, then the stuff is not going to get any better.
Mhm.
Now, I'm telling you all of that to say that uh, as I have sort of come back home with the way that I think of things politically, um, uh, I have seen that uh, there's a lot of issues that black men are not given a platform, uh, to speak, to share, to even, have another brother just listen.
Right,
There's not a lot of places for that,
right.
and because of that, uh, you know, I think therapy is absolutely critical
Yes,
because I
sir.
think we face a unique challenges as black men, but I think men, period, uh, suffer in silence. It's stressful to be a
Hmm.
patriarch.
Hmm.
It
It
is
is.
stressful.
Hmm.
I mean, all of
Hmm.
the stuff that we have to do. And my son does not care about my excuses. And so
Hmm.
I don't, so, uh, but I have to go somewhere. I got to go talk to somebody,
Right.
you know? So, so, so if you don't mind me asking, who do you talk to when you're stressed? Who does the therapist go to?
But that's an excellent question. Yeah, that's a very excellent question. For so long I've always been the facilitator of everyone else's pain that I had an existentialist crisis one time, Dr. Thunder. And I was like, well, DAM, I'm constantly helping everybody else. But when I'm in my crisis, there's no one there to hear me. Now, I'll say this.
Mm,
There are some brothers that I know now that I reach out to. I got other brothers that I just talk to. I didn't have that luxury in the past. Hearing content on YouTube is my therapy. Hearing other guys' perspective, that's my therapy. Talking to other men, reading books, that's my therapy. Also confiding in like-minded therapists that think like me. Every
mm,
therapist does not think like me because they have a more liberal, more panoramic view as it relates to liberal indoctrination. So they're
mm,
not going to understand where I'm coming from as a man. So these man spaces that I call a virtual barbershop, they give me what I call a form of synthetic therapy. So just hearing other men talk, listening to other men share their stories, reading books, and the few brothers that I talk to in private, that's my type of what I call pseudo therapy. That helps me buffer some of the things that I'm dealing with because I tell people therapists are human too. And therapists also need therapists as well to keep them grounded because this job, even though I love helping people, it can be very draining, man, because you're taking on other people's problems. And it goes back to what you were saying a minute ago, trying to be a patriarch because I'm a family man, I got kids, and trying to hold the fort down, man. A lot of times, people don't hear they don't care about what you're going through. They just expect you to be a mule. And to piggyback on that, Dr. Dunner, there were times where I felt like a slave. I felt like a mule. That's what I felt like. I felt like I was just living just to take care of everybody, and I was suffering in silence myself. And like I said, that's why I decided to become a therapist. I call it, in the clinical term, we call it sublimation, taking something bad and turning it into something good. And
yeah.
and that's what I did. I just knew it was my manifest destiny to become a therapist, and that's what I did.
Now, spirituality for me has been a powerful therapy.
Right.
Um, and, meditation, prayer, um, fasting, all of these, sort of, going to church, frankly, going to church. And I'm an Orthodox Christian.
Hmm.
And so when I go to church, the the sanctuary it's very much otherworldly. It's like a smells and bells kind of thing, right? There's candles, there's icons everyone where the priests are in vestments. Everything is, the icons are not drawn in a way like a photograph. They are um, they are accurate, but in a spiritual sense.
Hmm.
So everything is there's this otherworldly kind of thing that happens, and when I set foot in church, that does something. Um,
Yes.
it it creates a peacefulness. Um, something else that I've cultivated to reduce stress
Hmm.
is uh, learning how to become fully present in the moment. And that's not an easy one, especially if you're stressed out because you don't know where the next bill how's the next bill is going to get paid, and you you know all of that kind of stuff uh, that a patriarch has to be concerned about.
Right.
Being in the moment, fully present, can be really, really challenging to
Right.
develop that discipline.
Yes, sir.
But having developed that discipline, it actually is quite stress reducing,
Hmm.
because in any given moment, that is my opportunity to take a break from
Hmm.
baggage, to take a
Right.
break from the other stuff that's going on. I don't
Hmm.
have to carry that stuff uh, into each meeting, into each lesson, into each conversation. I can, every time I'm in a conversation, I can just focus on that conversation.
Hmm.
Um, and actually having these conversations, like with yourself, folks like yourself, being on different panel conversations, my conversations with Dr. Thunder series, my podcast. Um, that's been very therapeutic, because for an hour and a half, just talking to someone else and getting into their head, and uh, by extension, getting out of my own head,
Hmm.
you know, uh, is has been quite therapeutic. Um, so I would totally agree that this space, the manosphere, even if it's just listening to folks talk about stuff
Right.
that they've gone through, that's
Hmm.
powerfully therapeutic. Because look, there's only so many ways this thing is going to go,
Hmm.
and so 9 times out of 10, you're going to hear them say something that you've dealt with. And so just to know that you're not the only one
Hmm.
dealing with that
Right.
kind of stuff is
Right. Right.
is a
Right.
plus.
Well, it goes back to what I call about the tribal element. You know, barbershops were part of what I call that tribal element, where they say, and the Bible talks about it from a spiritual reference, but also from a secular reference. But in the biblical context, where in the multitude of counselors there is safety,
Mm.
but in the secular context, iron sharpens iron as it relates to what men go through on
That's
a
right.
regular day basis. So
Yep.
we had the tribal element of the barbershop where men would come together, we would chop it up and be brutally honest with one another. That's why I created the kosher clinician, because in Hebrew, kosher means complete. And I tell men, Dr. Thunder, that there are 7 things that a man must go through in order to become an optimized male. Those 7 things are: one, family, faith, finances, female psychology, politics, travel, um, and health. And so, if a man can master all of those 7 steps, he becomes optimized, which in essence makes him kosher. And so, my little moniker that I use, I say, if it's not 7, it's not kosher. If it's not kosher, it's not right. And so, in order for us to become the righteousness of God, but also to become the righteousness as it relates to being men, we must be strive to be kosher in all the things that we do. And so that's why I came up with the connotation of the kosher clinician, because there are 7 steps that a man must go through in order to be optimized. And a lot of men are not optimized because their calibration is off due to negative things that they have
Mm.
dealt with and that they're still dealing with because they have not done the shallow work or the introspection to break what I call that schema affliction. And schema is a fixated way of thinking in cognitive behavior therapy. But affliction, Dr. Thunder, is due to the pain that a lot of men have not dealt with. And that's why I'm so passionate, man, about the channel that I have. My channel is a cornucopia of what I call clinical science imitating the human arts. And what I do, I'm not straight to the point with clinical concepts because most people don't understand. So I use urban trends to inculcate that into what I'm trying to do clinically to make it make sense to the masses. That's how Christ was. When Christ, being the teacher that he was, he used spiritual truths, or he used natural truths to convey the richness of the gospel. He became, like Paul said, I become all things to all men that I may win some to the mercies of Jesus Christ. And that's how I try to get my message across. I try to be systematic in the process, but I try to be wise, harmless as serpents, sharp as serpents, but harmless as doves, as I try to inculcate clinical concepts into the kaleidoscope of what we call humanity.
Yes, yes. If I can get one of my moderators to link the Kosher Clinicians YouTube channel in the chat, please do so. Please do so. Thank you. And so I want to talk to you about something I started seeing a while back in the man space, the manosphere space.
Right.
And that is this whole discussion about nofap. Now, there are some sort of manosphere adjacent sort of places in the sphere that I also saw advocating for nofap. But nofap is just the abstinence of masturbation. Okay,
Right.
that's and we know that this sort of abuse goes hand in hand with pornography addiction. And so many men are struggling with that.
Right.
So many men. And it's interesting that topic would be something that got taken on by folks in the manosphere. One person in particular that talks about it frequently, and he himself has been on a nofap journey, is Solomon Jones, Solo TV 84.
Right.
And the spirit of the black manosphere. My man, interviewed him on Conversations with Dr. Thunder. He's a good brother. He's very eclectic. His content is very eclectic. It's anywhere from almost like pump and dump kind of content to spiritual topics. He's done an on nofap, also like cryptocurrency and stuff like that.
Right.
Anime, battle rap. I mean, he's a pretty eclectic cat, but that's how a lot of brothers are. And in particular, it seems like a lot of brothers that would share that same sort of story, having challenges with women and trying to figure out how to navigate. You know, there's a lot of us, I think, that have a lot of different kinds of interests that aren't the sort of usual thing. But anyhow, he frequently talks on the nofap topic. First of all, I want to ask you, what are your thoughts on this whole porn addiction problem? And then, so let's start with that, because I have some thoughts about it, but I want to hear what you think.
Well, listen, you're talking about seminal retention. I've heard guys talk about seminal retention as well. But listen, it depends on how you look at it. If you look at it through the lens of spirituality, it's definitely an issue because it can lead to objectification. It can lead to that.
Right.
And it more or less takes a man off his purpose. In the Gospels or in the Bible called it onanism. It was called onanism, and it was deemed to be wrong. Some scholars say it was wrong because onan, when he admitted his seed, he admitted it on the ground instead of putting his seed in a woman. So some argue that when a man emits his seed on the ground, that's instead of and putting in a woman, that it becomes sinful because his seed is his essence. There's a scripture that says, I believe, that it's better to waste your seed on the belly of a whore than to waste it on the ground. So it was called onanism. And listen, it is an issue because it's leading men not to be intimate with their women. It's a dopamine rush. It's almost like a form of self-medication. Sometimes, in the clinical term, we call it the iatrogenic effect. Most guys became porn, looked at porn as a way just to be curious, but they became addicted to it. So it's definitely an issue. Now, there's some that are more on the liberal side, Dr. Dunder, that sees porn as a natural way of men expressing themselves. But if we look at it from the lens of spirituality, it's definitely seen as being wrong, because a lot of men struggle with it. And unfortunately, porn becomes a form of slavery to a man because he does not have mastery over his flesh. And so, listen, every man has dealt with it. I think I have probably dealt with it from time to time. I'm sure you have. It ain't nothing to be ashamed about. I think every man, because it's so rampant. We see it so much in our face now. And I think every man at some point, whether he's a little teenager at 21, going to the X-rated store, peeping and hiding, every man has dealt with it. But also, Dr. Thunder, men deal with it because their wives have not been the solace to the therapy that they need. And we're gonna have a show this. I'm going there, Dr. Dunn. I'm going there because we're gonna have a show talking about sexist marriages coming up on Saturday. So a lot of women are supposed to be therapy for their husbands. The woman is supposed to be a nurturer and a helpmate to the pain that her husband is going through. But when that man is not getting that love from his wife, Teddy Pendergrass said it better than me. It's so good to love somebody than somebody to love you back. But when a man is not getting sex from his wife, then she's placing him in a predicament, in a vulnerable predicament where he has no other choice but to emit his seed, because releasing that semen is important to the health and also to the mental aspect of a man. When a man can emit his seed inside of his wife, it makes him feel loved. But a lot of women use sex to weaponize or control their husbands. The man has no other choice. I mean, can you imagine letting your semen build back up in your sack for over? Some men can't even go a whole week, but you got men that damn near been 6 months to a whole year they haven't had sex. So I'm like, what the hell are you expecting them to do? They have no other choice. Excuse my language, but they have no other choice but to release it some way or the other. No different than a woman when she's breastfeeding a child. If that woman breast get engorged with milk, she would have what's called seminal duct blockage, and she would have to use a cabbage leaf or fenugreek to relieve the stress that's accumulated from all that fluid. So if a woman can get released through fenugreek or a cabbage leaf to get the milk out, how much more should a man that's provided and protected and expecting to die at any time get sexual release from his wife? So it's almost like it's a necessary evil. Not saying it's right, but in some situations for men, it's a necessary evil, unfortunately.
It's interesting. Now, what Solomon Jones is advocating for is not total semen retention. What he was advocating for is no fat. So, for instance, if he had a girlfriend or something during that period, he would be having sex with his girlfriend.
Okay,
but but in particular, it's specifically related to sort of kicking that porn addiction. Now I'm going to tell you why I think that the pornography industry has been basically handled hands off by the government. Okay, and why they have not been totally canceled. Canceled before canceling was a thing. Even it's because there's such a large percentage of men that do not have access to women.
Mm-hmm,
okay,
right.
So first of all, if you just look in the history of the world, only 40% or about 40% of men have reproduced, where 80+% of women have reproduced.
Right.
And so that's not even, that's just the history of the world. Now let's talk about what's happened since social media really became something. So since about 2012, or well, I guess or earlier than 2012, but that's when it started when it really started to peak. You have dating apps, you've got um, Instagram. Uh, every woman has access to every man in the world, every star.
Hmm.
They everyone has access to everyone, and so what that's done is it's made the problem even worse. It used to be that you could go to some small town, some country town, and you could find, I don't know, maybe an 8 or a 9, and you'd be like, hey, what's happening? And hey, you could get together. You had a shot with an 8 or a 9.
Hmm.
Now you go to that same location, you find you an 8 or a 9, and she's got 150,000 followers on Instagram.
Right.
So if there was an opportunity or a chance for you to make that connection to actually uh, uh, marry a girl when you're both young, that's not really what happens anymore. And
Hmm.
so as a way to pacify men, the this whole free rampant pornography. I mean, at
Hmm.
least you have to think about it. At least the pornography should be behind some sort of paywall.
Hmm.
At least behind a paywall. But for the fact that it is just totally free and accessible to everyone, um, it just makes me think. I can't think of another industry that has uh, that creates anything near as negative as pornography that hasn't
Right.
been totally controlled by the government.
Hmm.
Totally. I mean, they're all of these around the clock. You don't see them as much now, but you used to around the clock against smoking. The truth, the whole truth thing, and everybody's against smoking this, smoking that. Yeah, smoking is bad for you. I'm
Right.
not saying smoking is good, but
Right.
pornography's got to be at least as bad for you. Maybe not for your
Right.
physical body, but it's at least
Hmm.
got to be at least as bad as smoking.
Right.
And then think about all the people that are in the industry. A lot of the women that came out of, uh, being what is it, sex trafficked.
Yes,
They
sir.
go
Right.
right into that industry, right?
Right.
And it's like, come on, man, what's going on? So I mean, that's my thought on it. It's just I don't know, the government, the powers that be, they turn a blind eye to it because it's like, well, if we don't have that, what are we going to do with all of these men? Because
Hmm.
now I said it was 40% reproduced. Now you're really talking about only about 15, maybe 20% of men
Hmm.
actually have access to women.
Right. Right.
Because the
Hmm. Right.
bottom 80 to 85% are totally invisible to women
Right.
because they
Right.
have
Right.
access
Right.
to all of these blue check mark cats, and they can get
Yes,
flued
sir.
out and all that.
Right, right, right. And I did a show of Dr. Dunn called a Defection for the Lack of Affection. I just came back from Brazil about a month ago, and I'm going to be in Frustrated 3 with Brother Al Grease. It's going to be a documentary. I'm talking about why American men are frustrated. And that's part of what you were talking about. Men now they don't even get a semblance of what maybe your dad or your granddad or your great grandfather got. They got feminine women that took care of their men, and they came in with the duty to serve, to honor and obey, and to respect their men. You use that dirty word, obedience. Some women get triggered by that, even so-called Christian women. But as you read Titus 3:5, the gospel clearly says, obey your husbands, as the man is supposed to obey God. So obedience is more of a mutual thing. Man obeys God, woman obeys the husband, therefore the family is taken care of. Um, but the key is a lot of men are struggling, and because of that struggle and because of the lack of affection deprivation, they are going abroad to look for women, to look for wives, because They feel like it's not here. And it's unfortunate because needs and behavioral psychology drive behaviors.
Yes. All right, everyone. I'm reminding you to please support the channel, like, share, subscribe. I'm not seeing any super chats. I'm not seeing any Cash App. So I'm going to run an ad. So check this out. We'll be back in just a minute. Hello, this is Dr. Thunder, and I want to discuss with you briefly some of the options on my website, drthundermusic.com, also drthunder.net. Now, if you're interested in taking lessons, then if you go to drthundermusic.com and then you go down, you'll see some links here. Down here it says online lessons. You click that link and you can see that there are 3 different offers. $75 for 1 lesson, $180 for 3 lessons, and $250 for 5 lessons. Yes, as you buy a package of lessons that has more lessons in it, it will be less expensive per lesson. I wanted to make those available for students of all levels, and so I trust that there's a way that you can get in with that rather affordable pricing, especially for someone that has my kind of experience and expertise. Okay, so there's also on that same page, you'll see down there's an example of a lesson, and then there's a video below that which actually is promoting my hot licks. All right, great. Now, for lessons, I offer lessons on, of course, saxophone, flute, and clarinet, but also lessons on piano, guitar, and bass. Now, what I focus on and what I'm an expert at is improvisation. So if you want to improve as an improviser, I would be a great teacher for you. I developed the improvisation sequence at The Ohio State University, where I serve as the Director of Jazz Studies. Also, I have a book that I published, that was published by Hal Leonard, called How to Improvise Over Chord Changes. And you can see there's actually a link right here where you can buy that book. My latest book, which was a result of 366 days in a row of playing an improvised line each day, and then those lines were transcribed and written out in all keys, and that document is 980 pages. It's 980 pages of very useful patterns, 251 patterns, all kinds of different abstract kind of patterns and things. It'd be a great way to sort of break up the monotony in your improvising. So, hot licks would be a great thing. So that's a download only kind of thing. It's $40 for that. That's an incredible deal. And there's an associated YouTube video which will have all of those lines played back to back. They're played on all different instruments. I play saxophone, flute, clarinet, play bass clarinet, bari sax, tenor sax, alto sax, soprano saxophone, piccolo, alto flute. I also play guitar, bass, and piano. I think I sang on one of them too. So these are going to be accessible for a lot of different levels. Okay. Well, they're pretty advanced, but they're all written out and it's all laid out there bare for you to see. and understand. Great. So, the other thing that's on my website, and you can actually get to this directly by going to drthunder.net, drthunder.net, is this personal development tab. Now, this is for folks that want to develop accountability, discipline, and productivity. These are things that I have developed over a career, a career as an academic, a career as a freelance musician. The fact is that if you want to be great at what you do, these are skills. These are skills that are going to be absolutely necessary. So stuff like organization, developing networks, professionalism, communication skills. All of this stuff is going to be very, very important. And if you think that I can be of assistance there, you can sign up for a consultation. Now, those consultations are $100 for someone. All right. I'm not sure what happened at the end there. I got cut off. It was all choppy and stuff. I'll fix that for the next broadcast. Sorry about that, folks. But let's continue on. We were talking about the whole no-fap thing and the sort of hold that pornography seems to have on men, and why I think that's we think that's obviously a negative thing. There's a purpose and a use for women and men, and we need each other, and that's one of the ways that we need each other. And also, to your earlier point, you're promoting the show that we're going to be doing on your channel, the Kosher Clinician, on YouTube, this Saturday at 9:30 p.m.
Yes.
Eastern Standard Time. So that's going to be great. I'm looking forward to chopping it up on that topic in more detail.
No doubt. Same here.
Now, one thing I hear frequently is this whole a healthy body makes a healthy mind. Now, that's a pretty oversimplified sort of, I think it's an oversimplified way to express what's actually being said there. But what do you think of that statement?
I think it's true. I think there's a biblical reference to a healthy mind and a healthy body as well. As I said earlier, human beings are integrated beings. And when one is off kilter, it can impact the rest. If you go back to the edicts of the gospel, Jesus said, I pray that both your soul, body, and spirit be held blameless until the appearing of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And so, yes, I believe that a healthy body is important to a healthy mind because it's psychosomatic. And so when the body is sick, then the mind can be sick because it's not calibrated. So I think that's very important. I think a lot of men are actually, the physical is sick, which in essence has impacted their mental. And so I think both needs to be in alignment in order to become a vibrant person. So, yeah, I think it's very important to make sure that the physical and the spiritual, the physical and the spiritual are perfectly calibrated. That's very important.
Now, further, I mean, I'm a fitness advocate.
Yes, sir.
And I'm a 5 days a week guy, and I'm a weightlifter, powerlifter, bodybuilder, something like that. And I'm chasing 500. So my current max is 415.
Oh, that's powerful.
And that's been some months ago. More than a year ago. It was before the pandemic started. But I'm back on an incline, and so I'm I think I'm going to be able to smash 415, smash that personal record. I don't know, maybe in a month, maybe a month and a half or something like that. Because this the way that strength works is, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do that
Right.
sort of even incline. Your body can't handle that.
Hmm.
So it's this sort of, you're riding these waves, and each one is a little higher than the one before, and you have to have points where you're not as strong, so that your body can recover, can fix itself.
Hmm.
Um, so more than there just being a uh, uh, so you said that there's a connection between our various parts, and so when one of them is out of balance, then all of them are out of balance.
Yes, sir.
Um,
Right.
uh, there seems to be something even physiological with our ability to think clearly, uh, and if we're in better shape. Like, if I'm eating a bunch of garbage, then I can't think very clearly.
Hmm.
If I'm working out frequently, then I also sleep better. And then when I sleep better, I'm more rested. When I'm more rested, I think more clearly. You know, there's like all of these kinds of connections,
Right.
in particular between the physical body and your mind. Um, yeah. Uh, so you said you're a family man.
Yes, sir. Uh huh.
And as memory, if memory serves, I think you said you have two kids in college.
No, no, I have one. I have one in
You,
college. She was held back due to the pandemic. But
okay,
I have one in college now. I have a one in high school, and I have one
okay,
in middle school. I have three girls,
I see.
so I got a trifecta. I wish I had a little boy like you, but I got a trifecta.
well, it's interesting on that point. I remember saying to myself, I've got friends that have girls, and I used to think to myself, man, that's got to be rough.
Hmm.
Man, as if I had girls, I'd have to go to jail. You know, you know, thinking
Right.
those kinds of thoughts, and and thinking that you know it's harder. I don't know. I think we're programmed to think that women have it harder
Hmm.
than men have it.
Hmm.
And when I started to reevaluate that, I actually started to realize that actually maybe maybe at least as challenging as raising a girl would
Hmm.
be raising a boy, because
Hmm.
especially black one, because I mean, if you disaggregate the numbers, when you talk about brutality against black folks, you're not really talking about black folks in general. You're talking about black men, right? And
Hmm.
and so having to worry about a lot of those kinds of things. So um, after having reevaluated, um, it does. I mean, I'm glad I had my son,
Hmm.
and the sports and all those kind of things.
Yeah, I
But
envy you.
I mean, all of us are going to have challenges.
Hmm. Right, right. Yeah, I envy you, man. I envy you. I envy you a lot. Like I said, I always wish I had me a little boy, but but it never happened. But as I said earlier, because human beings are integrated, both are equally needed in order to be successful. So
Yeah.
both are equally needed in order to be successful.
So I'm curious, what kind of what kind of conversations have you had to have with your daughters?
Well, when you put it, so make when you put it in the contextual framework, what do you mean? Break it down for me. Like when you say what,
Well, I mean,
what do you mean?
when dealing with maybe in relationships, or um,
Hmm.
just trying to be uh, adjusted adults, pursuing I don't know, pursuing career versus pursuing relationship, all of those kind of things.
Hmm. Well, I teach my girls to respect and honor themselves. I teach my daughters that they are the portals um, to allow the man to desecrate their temple. And
Mm,
if they're not doing the proper things to keep their temple vibrant, they can actually devalue themselves because they are not doing the proper things. So I teach my daughters that they are the portals to keeping their temples pure and clean.
mm,
I've been teaching my oldest daughter for the longest that the more she puts herself in a position where she devalues herself by not honoring herself and her body, it could greatly reduce her chances of having the kind of man that she wants. We live in
oh,
a culture, Dr. Thunder, where we tell our young girls, and listen, if folks want to do it, that's their business. You do what you want to do. I mean, folks can do it anyway. But there's a consequence for bad behavior. And I used to always use the analogy with my daughter with the ring, with this wedding ring. I said, if I took this wedding ring off my finger and I gave this ring to every woman that I dated that I wanted to be my wife, I said, would you want that ring? And she said, no. I said, tell me why. She said, because it's not valuable. And I said, and that's the same way men feel when some of our women, not all, constantly do the same thing. And I know it's a tough topic, but listen, men are the arbiters of relationships. We
mm,
are the purchasers, they are the sellers. And so, if you want to get a good return on your investment, you must present yourself in a cooperative way that can get you the outcomes that you want from a man. I tell my daughter that. Now, like I tell her, I say, you can do what you want to do, but remember, there's a price to pay for the behavior because masculine dominant men, they're not going to tolerate it, man. They're just not. They're not going to tolerate that. So I try to teach my daughters to conduct themselves like ladies. I'm not saying they have to be the Virgin Mary. I'm not saying they have to be prudes, but I want to give them all the information that's needed to give them the
mm.
information that's needed in order for them to be good wives at one day for their husbands at some point. And because I got great girls, man. My girls are great. They're hard workers. My middle daughter, 4.0 GPA. My oldest, I think she had like a 3.1 in college. She went to UNC Greensboro, and she's about to graduate soon. COVID knocked a lot of people off kilter, but she's about to graduate. So, we've had some turbulent times, but overall, she's a good kid, man. She's a very good kid compared to the kids now that we see in America. But that's because I'm a strong father, man.
Right,
I'm
right.
strong. I'm a strong father. Right.
That's what I was going to say. It just seems like p- part of the issue with how loose a lot of these girls are now is they don't have a someone telling them, look, this is what's going to happen if you don't you know if you don't pay attention. They don't have folks telling them the truth. uh, it's too much. You can do anything you want to do.
Hmm.
Nobody can hold you back, and a lot of
Right.
that kind of stuff. And yeah, I'm all for empowering women.
Hmm.
I'm fine with that. That's great.
Hmm. Hmm.
But you also got to tell them the truth about what's
Hmm.
going on. You have
Right.
a window. You've got a
You have a
short
window.
window,
That's
and
right.
you got to
Right.
make it happen within this window.
Right. Hmm.
And women have to have their stuff together a lot faster than guys do,
Hmm. Right.
and that's just reality.
Hmm.
Yeah,
No, I totally agree. I concur
yeah,
1,000%. I
yeah.
concur 1,000%. Men and women need to get their stuff together. And I mean, women need to get their stuff together if they want to have the kind of relationships that they so desire. But unfortunately, you know, they're not. A lot of our girls, Dr. Thunder, they're not seeing the gap because listen, we live in a culture where 80%, over 70% of our kids are raised in single parent homes, and almost over 60% of our children are born out of wedlock. I looked at a show called I think it was called 73%. It was an epidemic back in the 70s when 26% of our children were actually born out of wedlock. But we got almost 80% of our children, I mean, not out of wedlock in single parent homes, but we got a serious epidemic where almost over 70% of our kids are born in single parent homes. That's an issue of epic proportion that needs to be discussed. But that's what happens when you have these liberal laws and liberal policies that tell some of our young women, you know, you can do what you want to do and there are no consequences. And listen, I'm not advocating for men to be out here either desecrating these young girls and lying to them to get between the legs. That's equally wrong. But as I tell my daughters, I say, you guys are the gatekeepers to sex, and men are the gatekeepers to relationships. A man can do no more than you allow him to do, unless you've been molested or unfortunately, the R word. And
Right.
so I tell my daughters that they are equally responsible for making sure they're trying to keep their temple or keep their numbers as down as low as possible until they get a husband. Because masculine dominant men, when we decide to get in a relationship, we want a woman that we can feel proud of. Most masculine dominant men don't want a woman that's done a lot of different things with different people. Just like a woman want a man that can more or less hold his own and be somebody that she can look up to. Actually, more women are not as adversely challenged if a man has had more sexual escapades than her. Most women expect it from dominant men. Not saying it's morally right. I'm not saying it's right, but most women don't. If that man is handsome, got money and status, most women can look past it. Not all, but many women can look past it. But on the flip side, some men can look past it, but most men won't look past it if a woman has had too much fun. And that too much fun is subjective. It's normally based on the man and his upbringing.
Yes.
That's funny you say
Yes.
yes.
Yes. You know, it's just such a different dynamic now.
Mhm.
It's everything is just so different, and um, I think about the advice that my dad gave me about dating. And look, he did the best he could, but there's nothing that he could have done to be able to give me, you know, accurate information, you know, like a blueprint or something of what's going on right now. No one could know. No one could have known from his generation how much things were going to change and uh, what that was going to mean, for men's prospects. I mean, that whole thing, just work hard, keep your nose clean, all of that. There's a lot of truth there still, but there's some other stuff that's at work these days, and uh, it just makes it for very very much a challenging. Uh, I'm look. I'm glad I'm married because what's going on out here right now, man.
Mhm.
There's no way I would get married.
Yes,
I
sir. I
mean,
totally agree with you. I
there's
totally
no
agree.
way I would. It's such a crapshoot.
Yes, sir. I totally agree, brother. You're 100% correct. I agree with you 1,000%. You're correct. I totally agree.
All right, let's see here. It looks like I had. Let's see, what is this here? Oh, there. I think that they started talking about your comment about the ring
Right.
in the Lord of the Rings or something in the comments.
Well, what did they say? I mean, what did they say about the ring?
Something about the Ring
Well,
of
it's true.
Power or
I like
something.
that. The Lord of the Rings. Right, right.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
the man. Well, that's a true analogy. The man is the Lord of the Ring, because
yeah.
you know it's his ring that symbolizes his power, and only the right buyer or the person with the right acumen can get that power. Everybody can't get the ring from the Lord, and so the woman that has the best, the highest form of feminine virtue, can get that ring. So it's not relegated to just any woman. So yeah, men are
Mm,
the lords of the ring. That's a great analogy.
yeah. So Snuggles asks, is a woman more responsible with power, or is a man more responsible with power?
That's yeah, her question is sort of vague. I don't know what she
Uh,
means.
well,
But
I think
but
that yeah. I think the question. I think the question is
I
about.
think I understand it. I see what she's
Yeah,
saying
yeah,
now. It depends on the person. A man can be a despot, or a woman can be a tyrant in relationships as well. A lot of times people assume, Dr. Thunder, that men have an ego, but women have an ego as well. the feminine ego can actually be more dangerous because normally the masculine ego is about principle, but the feminine ego, Dr. Thunder, a lot of times is about feelings. How many men have been sabotaged because of the feminine ego of a woman? A lot of men have been sabotaged because of that. But normally, most men, even though those are the tyrants or despots, they normally do things based on principle, eye for eye, a tooth for a tooth. But sometimes our women, they do things based on how they feel. And those emotions can run deep. And when they don't, if they don't have a way to harness those negative emotions, women can be very sinister. You think about some of the most sinister women of the world in the past, they have done heinous things to derail the life of a man. You look at the child support system, the child courts. They've been
Uh-oh.
dangerous to more or less derail the livelihood of a man. So I would say it depends on the person. I think men and women both can be equally damaging as it relates to power. I think they both can be equally damaging, but because women are emotional or more emotional than men, I would say the women got a notch a little higher if they have power, because absolute power corrupts absolutely,
Absolutely, that's
and
right.
and so I would say women.
Yeah, that's interesting. You were talking about an eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. The reason for the eye for an eye uh, was not because it wasn't because uh, God wanted us to take something take something if someone took something from us. That's
Right,
that's not wasn't the point. The point was is that human nature is always to take something more than what was taken from you. And that's that
hmm
emotion thing. You get in your feelings, and this is a very feminine thing, but you get in your
hmm
feelings, and it's like somebody cut your finger off, you want their whole hand.
right.
That's the reason for that an eye for an eye. It's not to leave the whole blind, as it were.
Right. That's an excellent point. Right, eye for eye. That's an excellent point, because normally men, even if they're angry, they normally are fair, even in their anger or jurisprudence. A lot of times, I know some men end up killing other men, but like I said, there's a saying that say revenge is cruel as the grave. I don't know if it's revenge or jealousy, but jealousy is as cruel as the grave, I believe. And so, like I said, you think about the child support courts, family courts,
Right.
how women can be very vindictive over little things. Like if I got issues with you, we'll deal with it as men. I'm gonna be fair in handling business, but I'm not
Right.
gonna try to derail your life. I'm not gonna try to destroy your life. I'll do what I have to, but I'm not
Right.
gonna try to destroy your life because I'm fair in my retaliation. That's me. There's a saying that in love and war, all is fair in game, and love and war. So I'm gonna be
Hmm.
fair about it, but I'm not gonna try to derail your whole life just because I
Right.
had beef with you. I don't, I'm not gonna do that.
Yeah.
But I can't say the same for some of our women. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And that also goes to that whole point where I think among men, there's always a low level threat of violence.
Right.
So we know that we need to control ourselves
Yes, sir.
because
Right.
this is a grown man that I'm talking to, and he could
Right.
hurt me like I could hurt him. You
Right.
know, um, which isn't always the way that I think women tend to think. Um, okay, wait a minute. What is this? What is this point here? Look at the common. Let's see here. What is this? Okay, I'm not sure what they're talking about now. So anyhow, uh, all right. I was trying to incorporate some comments, but you all are talking about some stuff I don't know what you're talking about. So anyhow, um, it's been wonderful having you on the show. We'll have to do another show sometime soon.
No
Uh,
doubt.
I did want to say that one of the reasons why I wanted to talk on this topic is because I've done therapy myself.
Yes, sir.
Um, I, you know, and I didn't realize that this was a factor. But when I did therapy, I went to therapy because I was having severe insomnia, panic attacks, and anxiety,
Right. Right.
and they were all sort of ganging up on me. Um, and, I'm talking for a couple months straight where I was not sleeping.
Hmm.
And probably the worst experience I've ever had. Aggressive panic attacks that were being brought on. I mean, I go to the gym. The gym always was like a way for me to rest, rest, to to detox, to de-stress. But I got to the point where I couldn't tell the difference between the onset of a panic attack and elevated heart rate just from exercising.
Hmm.
So I would start having a attack even when I wasn't having a panic attack.
Right, right.
And it was all in my head. It was crazy. Um, I went to a counselor, and I got on some medication to help me sleep, some uh, non-addicting, not habit-forming medication to help me sleep. And after a while, I started to be able to sleep. And when I talked to the counselor about it, they told me to that I should consider uh, my family history. I had never thought about even considered that.
Hmm.
And in my family, there are some folks that have been on depression and anxiety medication for
Right.
a long time.
Hmm.
Uh, but I just never thought of that.
Hmm.
And then I started to think back at things that happened when I was younger that I just thought I was burnt out. But actually, it's more likely that uh, I was having, though lesser severe
Hmm.
symptoms, it was the sort of the same thing going on. And I mean, I've never ever in my life had to have a routine to go to bed
Hmm.
until after this last episode, which happened a couple years ago
Hmm.
now.
Hmm.
Um, but going to the therapist was it helped so much. First of all, the therapist, he had experienced similar things to
Hmm.
me, and so he could talk in depth about the stuff that I was dealing with. I remember one illustration that he talked about how anxiety is just a feeling. And he
Hmm.
said, if you can just imagine anxiety as being like a cloud and it's blowing by and eventually it's going to go away. And I just,
Right.
even stuff like that. And I don't know, maybe it seems like, this is stuff that you should just be able to do for yourself or whatever. But
Right.
I'll tell you this, that was the difference between me uh, having some really, really dark thoughts. Because I'm talking about no sleep. And then when I would
Mm.
lay down, I started to have a panic attack immediately. I'm
Right.
pacing around in the family room in my house all hours of the night. I'm going out and trying to get in my car. I was like, hey, maybe if I get in my car, I lean the seat back and I'm, listening to, the Bible on like YouTube channels with Bible readings and stuff like that, relaxing sounds for sleeping. I was doing all kinds of stuff, and nothing was working. I'm praying like crazy. I'm trying to clear my head. I'm trying to just calm down, and it was just, it was a really horrible experience. And I've tried to talk to my wife about it when it was going on, and
Hmm.
you know, nothing against her. She couldn't know. No, she couldn't know what that is like, uh, and she tried to understand, but she wasn't really going to understand that. And you know, being able to talk to your spouse about stuff is important, but
Hmm.
it's not
I
the
agree.
same as going to a therapist. It's not the same.
No, I totally agree. No, no, right. Because, therapists are clinically trained to help you deal with those thinking errors that you're having, but also to deal with those biological things that you're having as well. And so you're right. And then also a lot of times, you know, our women don't think like us. Their intentions are noble, but they don't think like us.
Right.
And because of that, sometimes they can be more of a burden than of a help. So I concur with that 100%. I concur 1,000% to be actually.
All right, man. Well, I look forward to being on your channel this Saturday at 9:30 p.m. Everyone,
Yes, sir.
and maybe one of the moderators can drop a link again for the Kosher Clinicians channel
Right.
in the chat there. But thank you very much, and I will see you on Saturday.
I look forward, man. It's gonna be a Power Fest show, and I might name the show "The Lord of the Rings."
All right. God
Well,
bless you,
anyway,
man.
brother, it was a pleasure, man. Be well, brother. God bless you as well. Take care.